Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's FIDO Alliance webinar sponsored by Cisco Duo. So thank you, Cisco Duo, for sponsoring today's webinar. I'm Megan Shamus. I am the Chief Marketing Officer for the FIDO Alliance, and I'm super happy to have you all here for this great topic, which is, well, the webinar is titled Achieving End-to-End Passwordless, but I'm really excited for this topic because, we know, I think you all know, I hope you all know, that passkeys are really the way to achieve phishing-resistant authentication. However, your journey should not stop there. We really need to be thinking about the whole life cycle of an account, including enrollment through the authentication, the session, and beyond. And that's what this webinar is about. So I'm really excited to have Matt and Chris here from Cisco Duo to present this, and I'll introduce them more fully in a moment. But first, the thing that I'm most known for within the world of FIDO is being really good at giving you all the housekeeping notes for our webinars. That's sarcasm. I'm hoping that I'm known for other things, but I do want you to know what to expect today. So you're on 24. If you've been on a webinar with us, you're used to our console. You're in listen only. You will be receiving the recording following this in case you miss anything. We also will send you a note afterwards, letting you know that you can view it. You do have the question widget, so please put your questions there. We will be saving a lot of time at the end for questions. We've been assured that we will have time for them, so please do put your questions in there, and we will have a Q&A later. And then you also will see that you have a survey. Please do take the survey. I promise you that I read every single response to the surveys because it's really important to us that we're providing to you the content that is valuable to you and you have good takeaways from our content. So please do take the survey, give us your thoughts. That will help us to inform future events. Okay, let's get started. Well, you know me, I'm Megan Shamus. Please let me welcome Chris Anderson and Matthew Miller from Cisco Duo. Welcome, Chris and Matt.
Thanks, Megan.
You're welcome.
I love being on FIDO webinars as always. Thanks a lot for inviting us on.
Yeah, and you'll notice, and I thank you to Chris and Matt for both wearing their FIDO swag today. Matt is wearing the Passkeys shirt. And wow, is that a oh, that's a good one. So that is the mirror shirt, which is the eye mark turning into the passkey icon. That is maybe a rarity in the world of FIDO. So I don't know. We might need to create an exclusive for that. FIDO store, visit it. Okay, now I would love to now turn things over to Matt and Chris to talk about how to achieve end-to-end passwordless. So please, Matt and Chris, take it away.
Are we having?
Oh, Chris was having a couple of headphone issues. So maybe Matt, you want to get started.
I kick it off then. So yeah, thanks everyone. Chris and I are happy to sort of paint this picture of how to get to a state where there is we've removed as much phishing opportunities as we can out of user onboarding, authentication, and then also later on how to sort of protect sessions. So in order to sort of plot the evolution of where we are now and where we could end up being, and when I say we here, I mean the industry in general. This is not a Cisco Duo specific thing. These are achievable goals that using technologies that are, a lot of them are standards based, well documented, are either there or on the cusp of being in a usable form, and we want to sort of help try and paint a convincing picture of how to tie them all together. So we're going to start by talking about the current state of authentication, kind of like what are users currently experiencing, how is the industry sort of handling username and password plus second factor. And then we want to talk about, excuse me, improvements and steps. Like these are sort of short to medium term goals on how to improve the authentication experience end to end. And then at the end there, we'll talk about how we can achieve end-to-end passwordless all the way from user onboarding all the way through to session protection. So Before we kick things off, Chris, are you back? Are you back in action?
I don't know. Can you hear me?
There we go. Yes,
You
now we can hear you.
are. Yeah.
So, all right. So now that we've confirmed that Chris's mic is working, I want to stop here real quick. We do have a little bit of a poll that we want to know a little bit about your Passkeys journey within your workforce. So just go ahead and take a minute. We have some votes already coming in, so that's great. We'll take maybe another, I don't know, 10, 15 seconds.
Yeah. Let's get to half of y'all haven't responded. We're at 25%, so I think we can do it.
My guess, Matt, is if you put your sunglasses on, more people will actually vote.
All right, here we go. I'll do it for more. There we go.
There you go.
Oh, that was the catalyst, 51%.
Love to see it. All right. So, see what we got here. We have, okay, so about a fifth of you say you have deployed Passkeys, which is phenomenal. That's excellent. 15% of you say you're in pilot. Love to see that. Let's see, 12%, that's almost about 13 are planning to deploy but haven't started yet, while almost about 40%, almost half the group say you're evaluating, considering deployment. There's a lot to consider there, so there's no, you've at least started the journey. That's great. And then about 8% aren't planning to deploy Passkeys, and maybe it's too early for your organization. No blame there. Chris is going to take the first part of this presentation here and kick things off by talking about the current state of authentication.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Glad to know my mic is working again. Thanks for helping me out there for a minute. Okay, so as Matt said, we'll start with the current state of authentication. We're going to start with just a slide that hopefully isn't new to everybody, but if it is, welcome. That's 80% of breaches leverage identity as a key component. Now, this statistic is from Cisco Talos, which is Cisco's own threat intelligence and threat research organization. And it's taken from 2023, 2024, from their incident response team. And again, they found that 80% of breaches leveraged identity as a key component. Now, my guess is, while this is a startling statistic, I don't think anyone on this webinar should be unfamiliar with it. In fact, I bet some of you may be nodding your heads right now and maybe even have some sort of similar slide in your own internal presentations that you give to your own teams. But the question that we should be asking right now isn't necessarily like having this slide up, but why is this happening? Why does this continue to happen year in, year out? Why do we continue to see identity as a core vector for breaches? And we at Cisco think that there's actually 3 core challenges, or maybe more, but there's 3 core ones, and it kind of creates this perfect storm. So there's limited visibility across your entire identity infrastructure. There's gaps in protection in general. And even when protections are in place, the experience is quite frustrating at times for both admins and end users. Now, for the time today, I'm only going to focus on 2 and 3, what the state looks like today, and then Matt, as he said, is going to go through like how can we improve it using FIDO and Passkeys now, and then how do we improve it even going forward. So let's start with key challenge number 2, gaps in protection. Today, we're actually seeing a serious gap in protection when it comes to authentication. Now, this graph is kind of hypothetical, but it does represent a typical organizational environment where you might have users that are accessing remote access through their VPN or RDP, or users accessing SaaS apps through a web browser. They might be accessing application from a domain joined managed device on a corporate network or from a BYO device. And most organizations have a portfolio of authentication strengths that looks something similar to this graph, where they have really strong authentication, phishing-resistance authentication, in maybe a few use cases, but not everywhere. So in this example, let's just say that a knowledge worker is in the office on a domain join using phishing-resistant MFA, especially because as an organization, that's a little bit easier to enforce. But for many others, and for the other use cases on this slide, like if somebody's using a personal device or an unmanaged device, or they're working from home, maybe they're just performing very weak MFA, so SMS, voice, maybe even push. And then there tends to be authentication scenarios in an environment that don't have any MFA at all. These are typically legacy situations or ones that are hard to protect technologically. So things like the Linux offline use case here. Now the question is, why do these gaps happen? Well, today it can be a number of things. It can be that not everyone has an updated device to support phishing-resistant MFA. They're in an environment that makes it challenging or impossible to deploy methods like Passkeys, or the application itself may be challenging to work with, or the application team hasn't updated that application to support the latest protocols, or they might be using an older version of a web view. Whatever it might be, there's a number of reasons for why. Some of these are going to be solvable that Matt will discuss, and some of these may just not be quite as easy to solve quite yet. And then secondarily, there's challenges around frustrating end user experiences. As organizations have deployed security measures, including MFA, in many cases it's caused frustrating user experiences where users are being asked to log in and authenticate multiple times throughout the day, sometimes even minutes or even seconds after they just authenticated before. So for example, Matt may have started his day logging into his computer, maybe with the username, password, and MFA, which that counts as one authentication in my mind, and then immediately went to access a web application. He's going to be prompted for a username, password, and MFA again. And then he gets to, let's say, his VPN, which uses an embedded browser, doesn't work with the other browser in which he accessed that web application from, and so he's asked to log in for a third time. That could have happened in, well, Matt, maybe 2.5 minutes between that whole process. And so end users get extremely frustrated when this occurs, and they start having resistance, both as users and even executives, in order to having resistance of adopting these authentication methods. And worst of all, when end users become frustrated, the admins also become very frustrated. So not only are these admins dealing with frustrated users asking, why do I have to keep re-authenticating, or dealing with high increase in support tickets of, I lost a device, my 2FA isn't working today, I don't know where I put my security key, I don't have my phone with me today, so I don't have my push notification service that I'm utilizing. Whatever it might be, those support cases are on the rise and on the increase. And at the same time, the admins are still trying to figure out how to deploy some of these difficult to manage solutions, ones that might have confusing or frustrating policy configurations, for example. Whatever it might be, they're having a hard time getting the service deployed. At the other side, they're having end users who are frustrated using it because they're authenticating a ton of times a day, or they're losing their 2FA, or just struggling with 2FA in general. So those are two of the main challenges that we are seeing. And Matt, though, is going to talk about what are we doing in the industry today to improve in those steps.
Sweet. Thanks, Chris. So this is sort of the status quo here. For the purposes of telling our story, we've broken up authentication into 3 distinct sections. Way at the very beginning of a user's onboarding into the organization, or like an MFA provider, there's some sort of onboarding of some kind. You have to get the user, get an account registered, get them signed in, and get their second factor authentication auth methods registered. So right now, onboarding can take very many forms. In some ideal scenarios nowadays, there's a sort of visual confirmation over video chat that a user is who they say they are. And once that identity is verified, it's very common for some sort of phishable authorization code to be then sent out to the user via email, for example. And when I say a phishable authorization code, I'm talking about like a magic link, has a one-time token on it that you can use, or a passcode, bypass code, something like that. Some way for the user to get into the flow that allows them to then register the second factor authentication method. A native app for push notification, things like that. Now, also, despite, I may not want to admit to it ourselves, but like username and password is still very common. And of course, the reality of username and password-based authentication is that it's very easy for an attacker to get those credentials, because password reuse is sort of a fact of life. We're all human. We can only remember so many things, and password locker adoption is not as high as we all wish it would be. And so it's very easy for an attacker to glean somebody's login information and then go ahead and compromise the user on either the site that was compromised or any other site that the user's been reusing their stuff on. Now, to tackle this, over the years, second factor authentication has been tacked on to username and password-based authentication. And these are all things like push notifications. SMS OTP is also frighteningly common. These are all additional factors of authentication that are intended to create additional roadblocks for attackers so that they can't simply get your username and password. It raises the bar of attack for them to then compromise a user's account. But to Chris's point, well, and then I'll keep the third part here is the session tokens. So you've successfully completed your username, password, second factor authentication. A session token of some kind is created to remember that you've logged in, so that you refresh the page, you're not being asked to sign in again. This is all fairly, fairly standard stuff that I'm trying to communicate here. Now, the real friction, I think, is in this middle part, the password, using passwords for auth, because this is the part that requires the most human interaction, is the thing that is completed multiple times a day along every one of those steps that Chris was talking about. This is the flow, where the greatest amount of friction comes from. And so starting here, how could we improve this? How could we remove user friction first and foremost? Because user satisfaction is users will feel the friction more than they'll feel things like session token protection. So let's focus on the user experience. Passkeys, as you may or may not, as actually a large number of people who reported into the poll earlier, you're seeing the benefits of replacing usernames and passwords and second factor authentication with passkeys. The way passkeys address the user frictions in username, password, and second factor is passkeys handle multiple factors, collect multiple factors of authentication in a single gesture. There's nothing for the user to remember. The way public key cryptography works, any information stored related to the use of passkeys is effectively useless to attackers if they were to gain access to the information in the database. So this, passkeys are good for users because they simplify and they streamline the actual authentication ceremony itself, where the user is actively involved in the ceremony. But then they also have knock-on benefits of reducing the amount of information that's leaked in case of a database leak that can be utilized by an attacker it shrinks the blast radius of account compromise. So great, this is, we have this today. Passkeys have been a thing for the last almost 4 years. Synced passkeys introduced a couple of years back. And really, they've been available to everyone for about 1.5 years now, are tremendously beneficial in making it easier for people to log in and reduce the friction. It doesn't decrease necessarily the number of times that you have to authenticate, but it does make it simpler, so it's less taxing on the user. So from this state, the next innovation seems to be coming for session tokens. The next level of protections that we can add to this, that we can improve the overall authentication experience, is by binding session tokens to a device. Now, in the earlier state, in the current state, I'm going to go back a slide here. Session tokens are, because passkeys have done such a phenomenal job of reducing user frictions while strengthening the user's security positioning, attackers are starting to set their sights on session token theft. This often involves endpoint compromise of some kind in order to exfiltrate a valid session token to an attacker's machine, so that the website just sees a valid session token and allows the attacker in. The attacker doesn't have to compromise the authentication methods if they go for the session token themselves. There are it's possible to protect it with maybe endpoint agents, or some tools are available there, but there's not a really good story for protecting session tokens right now. So that's changing with a couple of key things we want to call out here. One of them that is still fairly early on, but it's coming out of collaborative work between Google and Microsoft, is device-bound session credentials, DBSC. You may have seen this acronym. Device-bound session credentials are essentially a way for a website to work with a browser to sign a cookie using a key pair, a device-bound key pair that the browser maintains. And so there are essentially the website sets some HTTP headers, the browser detects these, and then there's additional steps that the browser takes in order to create a key pair for that site, protect your session token cookie, for example, such that if that session token were to be exfiltrated, the relying party, in the case of Passkeys, would be able to see that that session token was coming from a different device than what was expected, and could then invalidate the session token. So that's a really cool upcoming technology that's still sort of an incubation stage. Last I saw it back in April, but there's a lot of demand, there's a lot of interest in this technology as well. So that's something that I think we can all look forward to in the maybe short to medium term. There's also the shared signals framework, which is, Chris can talk about this a little bit more, but the shared signals framework is essentially a way for different services to communicate with each other in real time for example, real-time session revocation if a user's auth posture or device posture or something seems to be up. One service can signal to another service, hey, this seems fishy, you should log them out right now so that we can put them through our authentication flow to verify that they are who they say they are. And Chris, I don't know if there's anything more you want to add about shared signals framework?
No, that hits the bulk of it. I mean, the end goal there is trying to be allowing a standard way to allow third-party services to communicate, in this example, security events together. So security event happened in service A, needs to let your IDP or something know that that event occurred and to take action based on it. Historically, all these applications had to build per application integrations, and it was quite cumbersome and very tedious. One of the main goals of shared signals, make that a standard, publisher and a subscriber of events, share away, share one to many instead of just one to one. So yeah, Matt, you hit the bulk of it.
And one thing I want to add to what you just added to shared signals framework is that both DBSC and shared signals framework are intended to be open standards. They're not proprietary technologies tied to any one company in particular. These are intended to be a standard way for things to interoperate is the main goal here. Make it available to as many people as possible, because at the end of the day, if we can raise the bar of security for everyone, then everyone benefits. And so, these are some really exciting new technologies that are available either now in the case of shared signals framework or DBSC, hopefully sometime soon, that we can all look forward to. And so that's going to
that statement, Matt, is that while these may not be, quote, FIDO specific standards, right? Like we're focused at this point on not just the actual authentication itself. It starts to show how when you layer on all these standards together, it creates a much more secure system and secure event all the way through versus just thinking about it as one standard here, one standard over there, one standard in the middle. If you think about it holistically of all of them working together, you get a much more secure event. I say that because that question just popped up, so I wanted to just answer it real time.
And what's exciting too is that these session tokens, these session token protections, like FIDO 2 as a technology is focused on the authentication ceremony, on strengthening the actual providing of multiple factors of authentication. FIDO 2 has never aimed to solve for post-auth attacks like session token theft. And so there have been presentations in the past that say, oh, we've cracked FIDO 2 or we've broken FIDO 2, and what the attack that they're actually focused on is the session token theft that can occur due to endpoint compromise or things like that. But FIDO 2 stops at the auth ceremony. And endpoint compromise has never been an attack scenario that WebAuthn, for example, has ever attempted to incorporate a solution to. It's only been focused on trying to remove the phishing possibilities out of the auth ceremony itself. So this is really exciting when people are like, oh, okay, we've cracked FIDO 2 by stealing a session token. Well, no, you didn't crack FIDO 2, you stole some session tokens, but soon even those attacks are going to become a lot harder to pull off, and that's very, very exciting. So we've improved 2 of the 3 steps of we've painted. Here's a picture of how to go passwordless from the auth ceremony, which is arguably one of the most important parts of this, because it's the one that the users encounter the most often, and thus it gives attackers the greatest number of chances to attack a website or a user. But we can go one step further with some really cool stuff that's coming in maybe the medium term. And when I say medium, maybe, I don't know, 3 to 5 years, depending on who you ask, before it really probably hits mainstream. And the way we're going to do that, the way we think we can add an additional technology to everything else, to FIDO2 and to DBSC and shared signals framework, is by tackling the phishability in user identity verification. Now, earlier I mentioned that identity verification currently can happen via like a Zoom call or WebEx call or whatever, and you have somebody in the organization, HR, is trying to verify that the person on the other end is the actual employee signing in. And some of the common ways you can do it is the new employee flashes a driver's license or something, or takes a picture of it, and then they do the liveness check where they turn their face and there's the flashing colors and all that stuff. Now, technology is always advancing, and we have generative models and stuff like that are starting to show the possibility of legitimate attacks on user verification, identity verification. And so it's becoming more and more important to try and remove possibilities of identification fraud. And one way we can do that is through a technology called verifiable credentials. If you've not heard of verifiable credentials, they're essentially cryptographically signed documents that chain back to a trusted organization, that websites that want to verify something about a user's identity can confirm that this document came from a certain organization. And so, like, for example, the DMV could issue, in your state, could issue a verifiable credential with your name and your address and your date of birth and those kinds of things. And if you go to onboard to a company in this future state where verifiable credentials and wallets are ubiquitous and everyone's got something like that on their phone, for example, websites now have a path to, as long as you can produce this document, similar to how you can produce a physical driver's license, a website programmatically, remotely, can verify that information provided by a user is from a trustworthy organization. And so that sets a much stronger foundation for onboarding and passkey registration for the user. And that bootstraps trust more strongly than what we have today with remote identity verification. In addition, verifiable credentials can be utilized end-to-end, not just with HR, but maybe other organizations that want to prove who you are, that becomes a possibility now in this phase 2. So there's a lot less trust, like inherent trust, and there's explicit trust, because an organization can programmatically, using very, very difficult math, verify that something is a legitimate body. Now, wallets, protecting those documents becomes very, very challenging, but we have lots of very, very smart people working on that problem as well. That's its own domain of expertise. That's identity, which is very adjacent to authentication, which is why we bring it up here as a way to strengthen end-to-end passwordless. And also, verifiable credentials also allows you to do away with those magic links or those one-time codes. And so those phishable times of a user's onboarding are removed completely. And so attackers can't even really go after that, because then they have to go after and target an individual user, which I think the overall theme here is these are all technologies that prevent remote attacks. Attackers can go after individuals, but they have to work a lot harder to target specific individuals versus just waiting for a database to get breached and then grabbing all this information that they can then use to compromise the user and the website. And in addition to FIDO, and now bringing it back to FIDO in a bit, FIDO has certifications related to the use of, for example, biometric sensors, identity verification procedures. That certification can help give companies peace of mind that a vendor, for example, that they partner with that is FIDO certified is, has undergone a level of scrutiny that gives them peace of mind that this is a foundation of trust upon which they can build trust through subsequent processes in their organization. Maybe before I go on to resources, Chris, is there anything else you want to mention about any of this?
Yeah, I think on the onboarding aspect, there was a company, I think it was even this week, that had disclosed that they had a challenge with remote onboarding, where someone that was unintended to be hired made their way through and did the background checks, etc., and was able to become an employee for at least a day. And so that's where I think like the identity verification onboarding aspect, like as we solve for auth, as we solve for device-bound sessions, the next logical place we keep moving up the chain to onboarding. And so as Matt said, like that's a spot that I'm really excited to see that FIDO has added the certification process for the ID verification flows. There's a lot of innovation happening in this area to try to help with deep fakes, to try to help with how do you handle the document to the pairing of the user during that process and that ceremony to then issuing the verifiable credentials. So as Matt said, this isn't going to be something that takes off and solves all the world's problems tomorrow, but it's an incredible space that has a lot of innovation that's solving for very challenging situations in a remote first world. That once we can handle the onboarding, get rid of magic links, get rid of relying on your email to be the next vector of attacks, and focus on that remote onboarding for verifiable credentials to then enroll into a auth provider to then also take care of the sessions, we'll be in a much better spot. And so I think I call that my utopia world of the future. I think that's where we're all headed. And yes, Corey shared the link. I'll see if I can't make that public for everybody. But it looks like some of you know what that company was that occurred, and having them actually come out and publicly state it and what happened and how it's less about them and more about how they are highlighting that this is an issue for other people to also look out for, which I'm very gracious for them to share that. So I think that's all I would share, Matt.
So one thing, this deck should get shared out to anyone in attendance later. We left a list of resources here if you want to read up on all the technologies that we talked about today. Excuse me. So starting from the left side of that graph and going to the right, verifiable credentials, you can take a look at OpenID for VC for verifiable credentials out of the OpenID Foundation. The W3C has its own verifiable credential data model 2.0 technical recommendation, and then the Identity Foundation has its own. There's multiple ways to do verifiable credentials, and it's not that there's any one of these is better or they're not ranked in any way. These are different approaches to issuing verifiable credentials, to presenting them, and work. This is a area of research that is very rapidly evolving, and so but these are good starting points to get started going down that path if you want to learn more. And then, of course, for some Passkeys resources, the FIDOalliance.org/Passkeys has awesome guidance, especially with some of their UX guidelines that are rapidly improving all the time. Passkeys.dev also, and full disclosure, I'm one of the founders of Passkeys.dev, but there's some great developer-centric guidance on how to implement Passkeys for your organization there. And then full disclosure, I also maintain WebAuthn.io, which is a long time Duo property, and I'm the current steward of it for the last 3 or 4 years. But if you want to play around with Passkeys and experiment and kind of get a feel for it and all the many permutations, WebAuthn.io is a great place for that. If you want to read up more on the excuse me, device-bound session credentials, question earlier: is this a FIDO technology? No, it is not. It is currently being worked on in the W3C and the Web Incubation Community Group, the WICG. CGs can't create specs, but the typical process is something gets, a new idea gets incubated here in the WICG and then goes on to a working group that can ratify it as a formal spec. So, but like I said, this is still, incubating. So DBSC, you can learn more about it there. And then if you want to learn about shared signals framework, how it works, and you need a launching point for that, sharedsignals.guide is a great resource for that as well. And that takes us to the end of our formal content.
Matt and Chris, thank you. Matt, I'm just wondering if there's any other of your side projects that you'd like to promote before we move on to Q&A.
If you are a TypeScript project, my Simple Web Authn series of libraries is a personal project that I've been maintaining for the last 3 years because I'm a glutton for punishment. That you can go to simplewebauthn.dev if that's of interest to you. I also maintain PyWebAuthn, which is out of Duo Labs. That's a Python WebAuthn relying party library. So that you can go to, you'll find that on GitHub. I can hit me up on Mastodon and I'll help you find it. That's all I got.
Oh, good. Yeah. So I should have mentioned at the onset of this is that Matt and Chris are not just at Cisco Duo, but are SMEs on these topics, and I'm sure you've gathered that by watching this presentation. And Matt, in particular, was a WebAuthn fanboy, become expert in the space, and that is probably the only person who could say that. So I'm coming back to this slide. We have some questions. I want to just, this is a lot to talk about on one slide. I appreciate it. It is like a utopia kind of a situation, but I was hoping one of you could maybe walk through how this would look like from a user experience perspective. From doing the onboarding through leveraging Passkeys into the session. They're not going to see much in the session if it's secured, right? And then perhaps like if there was some account recovery or credential recovery needed, if you don't mind. And then I am asking, with the background on the onboarding piece, I mean, there are some questions of, verifiable credentials like perhaps could be leveraged for authentication in the future. And like, why or why not? Like, why do Passkeys complement this better than like leveraging the VC throughout the life cycle?
That's a great question. I'm more than happy to take it, Chris, unless you want to jump in. All right, so 2 parts there. The first part of your question is what is a hypothetical user experience? But I want to go to the first question or the second question first, where should I? Nope. Sorry, let me focus on the user experience first, because I think that'll set a much stronger foundation to respond to your second question. So the first question is, in this unfishable world of tomorrow, what does a user's onboarding actually look like? The funny thing about FIDO 2 as a technology and verifiable credentials is very similar, is that it's a very user-centric technology. Previously, the way you sort of onboard and you sign into things is the company or the service or the website that you're trying to onboard into knows something about you. And the idea is that you have to prove that you also know. It's a shared secret between the two of you. And if you can produce that shared secret, then there is a trust that is a relationship that is created between the two parties. Passkeys and verifiable credentials flip the script a bit by requiring, because they put the user in a position to assert something about themselves, and then the website or the service can then accept that credential in a general sense here, and go, okay, yes, I'm going to trust this because I have decided, for example, getting a little bit more concrete in the case of onboarding, HR could go, hello, welcome. Here's a website. This is example.com/onboard. And all the user sees is a QR code. Like, there's no username, there's no password for them to verify about themselves. So what a user does is they take their phone out and they scan this QR code. There's enough open standards in place where they get prompted for any wallet on their device to produce something, to produce a verifiable credential that has information about them. It could be first name, last name, and street address, maybe. I don't know, something like that. And so the user chooses the thing on their phone going, I want to produce this to the website, which will provide them the information that they're requesting. The website receives the document and verifies the information in it, and verifies that it's from an organization that the website has chosen to trust as an issuer of a credential that, like the DMV, California DMV, because I'm in California. This website has chosen to trust the California DMV, and I digitally produce my DMV or my driver's license verifiable credential. So then, without producing anything phishable, there's no way for an attacker to get my verifiable credential because it is on my device. It is not residing somewhere remote. the onboarding, the phishing, the one-time code that would otherwise get sent out is done away with completely, and the website opts for just a generic QR code that the user submits something to then verify the information about it and decide if it wants to trust that user to continue the process on. And passkeys, through that lens, passkeys are the same thing as well. With conditional UI, a user essentially chooses a passkey that they have registered for that website, and then the website can go, oh, hey, I recognize this credential ID, and I have the public key for it. I'm going to verify the signature, and I'm going to sign you in as the user that I have associated with that, without the user having to provide a username even. That's how streamlined you could get that experience. And so hypothetically, after the user scans the QR code, produces something in this onboarding flow, then the website can go, I have verified this verifiable credential. Please register a passkey for the website. And then the user goes through the traditional passkey registration flow that we're all used to right now. Now, that segues into your second question about why not just have the user scan the QR code every time they want to sign into something and only use verifiable credentials for your authentication. And Chris and I are taking the stance that passkeys are a much more streamlined way of signing into things, because you scan the QR code, you essentially say yes, no, and then a response is generated, and then you can sign in. In the verifiable credential space, the potential for UX friction is a lot higher because the contents of the verifiable credential are more privacy invasive, in a sense. And so a website that chooses to go with verifiable credentials as an authentication method is necessarily reprompting a user over and over and over for user identifying information by nature of a verifiable credential. This has very private information about a user. And so every time you sign in, there's a concept called selective disclosure that it gives the user some agency to choose what they divulge. But like, the fact of the matter is, going with an authentication ceremony that's focused on verifiable credentials adds this information, like exposes information on every auth in a way that doesn't need to happen. If you can establish trust one time and then say, this passkey that was generated after I verified the user's identity, I am trusting it because I trusted the user at the time of onboarding. And from that point on, passkeys are user privacy preserving by design, and frustratingly so sometimes from an RP's perspective. But passkeys are not only more streamlined, they're a faster way to sign in, but they also don't divulge much about the information about the user on every auth. And so that gives users a tremendous amount of privacy and protection in a way that we don't currently have. And so I would caution organizations that think there's an opportunity to sort of go straight from verifiable credential for onboarding to verifiable credentials for auth to consider your users' privacy. And it's because it's going to reduce your liability in case of breach, for example, somebody getting this information somehow. And like, why put yourself in that position? The technology is there. Passkeys are there right now for you to do it in a way that lowers your liability, your legal liability in case of breach. Sorry, that was a lot that I went over very quickly, but I hope that
it's great. And I wanted to just the beauty of a VC is that not every piece of information needs to be taken in by the service. So in theory, and I do see some of this happening out in the wild today with the hiring process. So when we're talking about, you're not onboarding an employee fully because they're not hired. However, there is some wanting to be aware that this person is whatever attributes you're looking for, and that they're the same person every time they come in for an interview, especially in the world of like remote interviews and things like that. And so this process could work from the interview process through, like in an enterprise environment, in the interview process through to the hiring, or if not hired, then you can just sort of erase, those things. And like this can add more assurance for hiring folks too. And that is something that there was some questions about the thing that Chris brought up around the hiring of folks that I just wanted to raise, like this can start at that point, right?
Well, and that's a good, yes, absolutely. And selective disclosure, to your point about, sending in, too much information every time, there's a desire for verifiable credentials to not go that route because this is a common scenario for a lot of people. You go to a bar or whatever, they want to prove your identity and that you're older than 21 in the US anyway. You show somebody your driver's license, you show the bartender your driver's license. You're not only showing them your birth date, you're also showing them your eye color, your physical address, whether you have a Class M license or not, like all these various additional information when all they care about is whether or not you were born before, current year minus 21. Verifiable credentials are very conscious of that reality of physical driver's licenses. And so there's a selector disclosure is the general name for a technique of going, okay, I have this information or I have this document full of cryptographically verifiable information. How can I only show you my birth date without showing everything else, but still like cryptographically link it back to the original document? And it's a very complex problem space with lots of solutions right now that are kind of jockeying for position. But also, you raised a good point about how we're talking about removing the phishing out of onboarding, but just as important is also removing the phishing out of account recovery. And verifiable credentials can also be used for that in essentially the same way. If you think about account recovery, you are onboarding somebody who has lost their device back into your system with a new device, and that new device needs to have trust established with it. Well, short of a magic link, which again is phishable, an attacker just has to go after the account recovery process. If your account recovery process is essentially scan this QR code, show us the same information we requested during onboarding so that we can trust you, that is, keeps that bar high, but also represents a potentially self-service way for a user to get back into an authenticatable state without having to get help desk involved, which goes back to that, Chris's slide about how user frustrations translate into help desk frustrations. So this represents an opportunity to reduce frustrations from the help desk IT side of things as well, if we can ever get there,
So I have to ask, and someone's asking in the questions, but I would have to ask anyway. Synced passkeys. So you said you trust the passkey, right? You in this flow. Do you trust, or do you know if that passkey has been synced? And in this world, like, do you continue to trust that? How do you look at that, or how should folks look at that?
Chris, I've been hogging the mic. This is your chance to jump in if you want.
I'm over here answering a ton of questions and comments.
Okay,
So if you want to start, I will.
Yeah. So synced passkeys are very interesting.
Like in this flow where the flow is talking about synced and/or device bound, because you say wherever they are, whatever device they have. So I'm just like, how
So verifiable credentials is interesting because that side of identity is going with a device-bound centric approach to identity document control. And so there are very few, from the conversations that I've participated in, there's very few organizations that are trying to achieve synced verifiable credential documents. The idea is it's easier to establish trust if you can design around the assumption that a document there's only going to be one copy of a document issued to a single device. And so as we had in the early days of WebAuthn and pre-synced passkeys, there's a lot of organizations that want the access device in terms of authentication. They want the access device to be the same thing every time. Financial services industry is very, because of regulations that they must protect or they must adhere to. The lack of device binding with synced passkeys remains a pain point for those organizations. So it's a tough question to answer, whether or not after a verifiable credential based onboarding flow, if you can trust the synced passkey and every device it appears from use.
Right.
Because it's not just the presentation of a verifiable credential, it's a website has to take into account how the synced passkey is being protected. That's still going to be the case, even in a verifiable credential-centric world.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I think maybe we're going to see a mix of solutions, maybe for organizations that need to be mindful of the device identity. And so I don't think I have any like silver bullets here, and I don't see any silver bullets on the horizon. I see additional augmentations to passkeys, to ways that you can use passkeys that would assert device identity in some kind of way that would be separate from verifiable credentials. So yeah, sorry, I don't think that's a really good answer.
No,
to
it's so I think what you're saying is, I mean, the issues that an organization might face with sync passkeys will be the same regardless of whether this is part of the, VCs are part of the onboarding flow. But
agree, yeah.
I think that so there's the world of today with passkeys where it's going to be, up to each individual service to maybe leverage additional risk signals, when that passkey is being used and making determinations of whether or not there needs to be some sort of step up. And then we would hope in the future there will be additional capabilities and signals provided to the services.
Right, and step up is a great point too. You could verifiable credential presentation could be an alternative to step up, because step up is commonly SMS OTP. If this is step up because you don't trust the passkey because it's appearing from a different device, a website or a service could choose to request a verifiable credential be presented that was used early on. So yeah, lots of and I think at the end of the day, the focus should be really should be on how do we get rid of phishing. Verifiable credentials are a technology that's coming up now. Passkeys are a technology that exists now, but all of this stuff is moving, and who knows what, FIDO 3, quote unquote. It's not, nobody's talking about that, to be clear for the record. Nobody's talking about a FIDO 3. I'm just saying hypothetically, in some future state where the next evolution of FIDO 2 comes along, the end goal should really be, how do we get rid of remote attack scenarios? And so, we have it with passkeys, and things are just getting better.
I think, Matt,
I'm sorry, the Wall Street Journal is calling me about FIDO 3.
Way to go, Matt. I think if I could sum up kind of what you said, Matt, there's probably one way to say it is that it's a layering approach. One thing, like a passkey by itself, will not solve the utopia unfishable world of tomorrow. It is a layering approach of different services, even for syncable passkeys. There could be a statement said that, well, if you have an MDM, you can still decide which devices are allowed to actually authenticate into your environment, into your IDP, whatever it might be. It's a layered approach. It's not just an if/or statement. Right,
and there's even, so it's a layered approach, and every layer has a spectrum of security and convenience. And so I think the sort of unfishable world of tomorrow that we've been talking about for almost the last hour is a very enterprise-centric end state, where it does have a higher degree of friction than if you, maybe this is one side of the spectrum. So if we kind of dial it back, an alternative to this could be for a majority of websites that just want to protect themselves with passkeys and don't want to have to store passwords of any kind. Do an email verification. Do a OIDC, maybe like a sign in with Google, just to bootstrap account creation, and then do a passkey registration. And from that point on, you're not signing in with Google. From that point on, you're signing in with the passkey that's been registered with the local website. There is a spectrum of protection that can be achieved that still gets rid of phishable opportunities using existing technologies today. Verifiable credential is going to be one of the stronger, more secure ways of pulling this off, but it does swing the pendulum over towards security at the expense of user experience. So yes, every layer with a huge spectrum between convenience and security, that every website, every organization is going to have to sort of sit down and evaluate eventually based on their security modeling. That's a great point.
Yeah, and I think your point should, I hope that folks take this point very seriously, which is, yes, you have passkeys. You need to be creating robust security around these things, but also in authentication, as long as you have phishable authentication methods as a fallback, attackers are going to try to take advantage of that. And this is what we saw with this attack that was in the media a little bit, where this attack, which occurred in a lab environment. Haven't seen it in a while, to be clear, but understanding that Passkeys are phishing resistant. Did a session hijack attack where they removed the ability to sign in with the passkey from the login flow, reverting to username password, because this services typically will allow a fallback like that. And this is not it's perfectly understandable in today's world to continue to have these methods as we're rolling out passkeys. We're still in very early days. There's no it's not shaming anyone or any service for continuing to have these methods available to their users, because you want your users to be able to sign in. We get it. Like, that's what they're there to do. We don't want any friction in that. However, longer term, looking at removing those phishable authentication methods, should be on roadmaps, right? Would you agree with that?
100%. Absolutely. This isn't going to be an overnight transition to passkeys. Passwordless. It's always really bugged me that the less suffix, people take that to mean like no passwords, but the goal of FIDO has always been fewer passwords. And so if we can, maybe you have a password into your email provider, but everything else is passkey centric, like that's still a really good place to be in. And if you can remove passwords 100%, even better. But a majority of people are never gonna get there. Or if they will, it's going to be a multi-generational thing, just as passkey adoption takes on. So,
or like flipping the script, it flips the script. Like when you look at risk, all of a sudden, entering a password is a risk. It becomes a risk signal, or let's have that be a risk signal. If your user is typically signing in with their passkey, as we want them to be, all of a sudden there's this fallback to password. That should be raising lots of alarm bells, and there should be requests to ensure that user is legitimate for whatever means that you want to do that. And I think a lot of this with on the authentication piece is just new. It's a new way to think about things. We're used to thinking about factors. We're not used to having a phishing resistant first factor, and so it's just sort of like changing. We need to change our mindsets a little bit. But I think like for the better, of course.
Yeah, Megan, the way we think about that, like within Duo world at least, is to your point, like we look at 3 different worlds of context. There's the user context, there's the device context, and then there's the actual context of the event occurring at that moment. And so like to your point just now, you've got to look holistically, at least across all 3 of those for the example you just gave, right? For whatever reason, I couldn't log in with my passkey today. For whatever reason. And I'm then falling back to a password and maybe an MFA. Like, I need to ensure that that's still Chris, that's still Chris's device that he's using, but also share that context of that event happening. That's a great spot for like shared signals to be able to populate that to all the other services. Like, hey, this is occurring here. Here's a device. Here's how he logged in. It doesn't look necessarily bad, but it introduces a little bit more risk than if I just logged in with my passkey. So depending on what you're doing on the other services, like, be aware this happened.
Yeah. Exactly. So the whole so it's a whole picture of the authentication event. It's not just it's not as narrow as we might be used to looking at it. And we certainly don't think that any organization thinks they're all set once they've deployed passkeys, but this is a really important sort of reminder just to be looking at this whole flow in this way. I want to ask one more question before we wrap, but it's about moving passkeys between platforms and devices, like exporting. And sure. So do you want to mention the spec that's in development for that, if you don't mind?
Sure. There was a FIDO plenary in May where the credential exchange protocol and the credential exchange format were publicly revealed. You can go online. We can get a link for everyone later. But this is there has been for the last 2 years, there has been an active effort to enable a user, to empower a user to migrate their passkey between providers. And so, when Passkeys came out, there was a focus on just getting the syncing down right. But the intention was always that you would be able to take your iCloud keychain passkey, for example, and export it to Bitwarden or Dashlane or 1Password, for example, or go from 1Password to Dashlane. And so the credential exchange protocol is an open is a standard that is being worked on within the FIDO Alliance that will be open for anyone to implement, that is intended to allow for secure passkey private key information between providers without an intermediate clear text state like you might assume with traditional password manager migration, where you export everything as a CSV. Like that's bad to have everything in the open there, including private key bytes. And so CXP is a way for two passkey providers to securely talk to each other, secure their communication between each other, and then securely send information over, similar to like HTTPS. And so, yeah, if you want to check, if for anybody that's interested in that and what's going to be coming up soonish in the FIDO space, I don't have an exact timeline.
We have the working draft available on our website, and there's a public GitHub repo to give feedback. So it's just on FIDOalliance.org under specs. You can have a look at that. This has been a blast, and I know there's more questions. I want to just let you all know we do have our Authenticate conference coming up in October, and Matt and Chris will be there, and we'll be answering questions. We're actually going to have dedicated office hours for this purpose. So please, join us there, and you will get access to these great experts as well as others, of course. But thank you so much, Matt and Chris, for this webinar. And if we didn't get to your question, we will be following up with you. We have all the questions, and we will get back to you, of course. But we'll wrap there, and thank you so much. Take the survey, and we will see you on a future FIDO Alliance webcast. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, all.